There's a fairly interesting anecdote about how I first got into writing a book like All the Best Things. I probably was at some point in high school, I think it was junior or senior year, when I was up in a camp in Newton, Massachusetts. And, it was a fairly decent camp, but like all students over the summer, I really didn't want to be there. Although I put on a nice smile and got through it. And my Aunt Bernadette, who lives in Boxford, was so kind enough to rescue me from basically weeks of non-fried food and, only, bingo parties. And she took me out to a couple bars. It was fun. And then she took me out to a place called Newberry Comics, which is sort of like a part like record store, like part like novelty shop. And in a corner of that room was a whole pile of Bob Dylan CDs. And they had vinyl there, but I was looking at the CDs because I didn't have a vinyl player at the time. And they had, for I think it was like 50% off, something like ridiculous. Basically a copy of Bob Dylan's John Wesley Harding. And of course, on that album you have All Along the Watchtower. So what I did is I got the CD, I went back to, basically my dorm. I played the CD obsessively over and over and over and over again, and was like, I need to do this. Like, why can't I be a folk balladeer? I was really enchanted because I thought if Dylan could really do what I always wanted to do, to be like a poet who could channel his art through music, I thought that clearly I could do it as well, and definitely maybe even add some modern flourishes, more contemporary 21st century messages and things like that. So I called up Matt Lewis sometime later on that week, and I was like, hey man, let's try to form like a duo, at least temporarily, and try to, bar hop and maybe perform. And that's how Rectaven got started. It continued after that and evolved into, a long-standing band, and it's still it's still definitely there. So when it came time for me to write down my experiences, there's a very famous scene in All the Best Things where Grace first meets, the character of John in a record shop. And while I placed the record shop, called the Clockwork Orange in the book, in New York City, I was always thinking of that location up in Boston. I was always thinking of that kind of the magical place. So it's interesting how what I would do is I would take little experiences and I would weave them together. They might be out of place in reality, and I would just, like a big puzzle, all put them together into the collage, into the nexus of what I was trying to do. You see, with All the Best Things, what makes it more genuine and perhaps more direct than, let's say, if I had tried to create a glamorized portrait of events, is that I showed the little silly things which made up my experiences playing music in the area. I didn't want to portray, me and my buddies as like, great prodigies running around. I wanted to show how we sucked, how we had far to go, but how we had big ambitions. And I think a part of that comes through in the dialogue in places like the record shop, or for example in the scene between John and Mark on the train as they're heading back to Manhattan College. And you can tell by the way they're talking and the way they're communicating that, these are huge enthusiasts. They're making references to James Taylor, to the Rolling Stones, and the list goes on and on. But you can tell that they're still amateurs. They still want to climb to that top. So what's great is the book really does show a progression, how clearly only by working together can they find some kind of a unity. Can they actually become the artists that they want to be, get the gigs that they want to get. And that was true of Rectaven too. I mean, we worked hard. The first 2 or 3 albums we did were basically no more than basement tape recordings done on an iPad and then on the Zoom. But right now we're playing to an audience which is appreciating our work, and we definitely sound way better. We worked on our harmonies. So in that way, the book reflects that similarity. And for that, I will always be grateful because I can always go back to the book and say, this is like a record of that one section of my life. It's very nostalgic. Obviously, a big part of All the Best Things is the fact that I wrote myself into the book as John Brennan, being a blind musician. And I don't usually touch blindness directly in my writing, mostly because while I consider myself to be, definitely visually impaired, that's an obvious fact, I don't like to make that the focus of everything I do. I consider myself a full individual who happens to have a disability rather than a disabled individual. And it's that distinction which has led me basically to write, stories about other individuals whose ideas are mirrors of my own, or making statements which I want to make almost as proxies. But what's interesting about this book is I decided to just try to tell it as it is and try to explain what is it like to go from day to day experiencing trying to cross a damn street, or try to show the normalcy of actually being blind, how ordinary it actually is. But I think what makes All the Best Things so beautiful is it's a synthesis. It's taking our lives and trying to adapt them into something which is beautiful to watch, which is visceral to watch. It's the story of young people. And as a young person living in America, who's fairly well read and fairly well educated, I would hope that this story is universal enough to touch other hearts and to let the world know that we can indeed make a difference through our art, that our art has meaning, that it has message, that it can do something. And as a result, I have great faith for the future. I really do. I don't think it's all going to go up in smoke, so long as people like myself and Matt Lewis and Samantha Moe and Amber Day continue to follow their dreams and follow their artistic inclinations. Because if we could be sort of like the proverbial Socratic gadflies of our culture by channeling our own experiences, then we can actually make an accurate representation of the problems and the successes of our time. And as a result, I think All the Best Things altogether is sort of a portrait not simply of my life or an adaptation of my life as a blind person and as a musician living in New York. I think it's a portrait of my generation to some degree. And I want to show that that generation has a lot to share, not only simply artistically in the upcoming years. We've seen nothing yet, we're going to see a lot more. But that we will definitely change the world as poignantly as our parents' generation did. And we're going to do it by music. We're going to do it by our soul. We're going to do it by means of our collective will to try to find what we love and do it well.